Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. Nice to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for
Uh,
having me.
Thanks for taking the time to join us today. We have a big group and a group that's super excited to hear you speak. And this is being recorded as well too, just so we can share with people who aren't able to join. But maybe I'll kick it off with just a quick background on you for the context of the group, that I can also give you a bit of an overview on our program and the attendees today on this call. And then we can keep it pretty casual and conversational. Just want to walk through your experience as a founder and draw upon the wealth of your knowledge in the space. And yeah. So first off, I'll kick it off with an introduction on Aman. So hi, everyone. I'm hugely excited to introduce our speaker for today, Aman Magoon, who's a unique blend of entrepreneur, bringing together technical prowess, pragmatism, and the wealth of experience in the healthcare industry, and from past jobs in the financial and tech sector, from roles at LiveRamp, Ernst & Young, and Deloitte, amongst others. Aman has been a part of the SoMa family for a while now, originally on the founding team at Naya, which is a Series C company that raised over 100 million in funding and was working on optimizing health benefits, working with large customers such as ADP and Guardian, and ultimately reached over 300 million employees across the US. And then we're currently hugely excited to back in his newest venture as a co-founder of Adonis, which is a revenue intelligence platform that helps providers simplify their billing and collections processes and allows them to focus their time on providing care. Aman and his brother turned co-founder Akash came up with the idea for Adonis when Akash suffered an injury that led him to intimately witness the grappling process of pre-approval, claims processing, and reimbursement for a medical procedure. And then driven by the conviction that they could build a more efficient solution, the two left Naya to dive into the world of medical insurance and revenue cycle management with Adonis. Adonis actually recently announced the close of their impressive Series A round led by General Catalyst, and shows no signs of slowing down, has been forging large penetrating industry partnerships, and is currently overseeing billions of dollars of claims as one of the fastest growing healthcare software companies in the US. SoMa has been incredibly humbled to know Aman from the early days and to be repeat early supporters in his ventures. And so without any further ado, we're insanely excited to kick things off today for a SoMa Fellowship Fireside Chat, and welcome Aman, the co-founder of Adonis. So yeah, hugely excited to have you. Maybe I'll turn it over to you. Or I guess first off, just like high level context. I know you have some insight into the program, but our SoMa Fellowship program is just like backs early teams. People are kind of building across all different sectors. We actually have a number of teams in our current batch that are building in the healthcare space. But teams are kind of across all sectors and different stages of growth, generally kind of like the pre-seed seed range. And we're just looking just a high level, hear about your insights and experiences in scaling two companies. So yeah, maybe I'll kick it over to you. I'd love to kind of hear, like, I know I gave some colors and varieties of a background here, but a background on you and yeah, where you're working on.
Yeah, I'd love to. Nikita, thanks so much for having me, and congrats to these young budding entrepreneurs and now fellows of SoMa Capital. As Nikita mentioned, proud to say that Akash and I, my brother and I, are both proud second-time entrepreneurs working with SoMa Capital, and so their support and mentorship has meant the world to us over the past few years. By way of background, my name's Aman. I grew up in the Baltimore, Maryland area. I spent I guess my earliest years as a student as kind of a rule breaker, and always kind of knew that I wasn't really meant for a ton of scholastic achievement, and I guess graduated and joined George Washington University. So I studied there as an undergraduate, studied finance and economics. I really enjoyed my time, especially studying econ, because I feel like it's the study of decision making, which is something that I think we can all use as entrepreneurs, understanding how folks are analyzing their own incentives as they make decisions. It's certainly been a degree or a field that's been tremendously valuable to me throughout my career. And so I spent the first handful of years out of college as a management consultant. So worked with several large consulting firms, primarily supporting government agencies. Being from the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, a lot of the consulting work, especially the most exciting consulting work, is in support of the Department of Defense and the defense agencies. So had a really great time working with some of these large federal government enterprises. And this was around the time when business intelligence and data analytics was kind of finding its stride, and the government was now catching on to kind of the value of harnessing data, building data warehouses, building business intelligence programs. And so I really developed, I think, my early brand as a professional in kind of my expertise around building BI programs. And so after several years of working as a consultant, I realized that I no longer wanted to be in the business of selling my hours or my time. I wanted to be in the business of selling software or building software. I realized that as a consultant, I'm always constrained by the number of hours in the day that I have to bill a client. My value to my firm was always a function of how many billable hours I could deliver on behalf of the firm, and realized that if I could take those same hours and dedicate them towards building kind of a world-class product, that I would find it much more empowering and exciting for myself as a professional. And so in 2018, I left my fun career as a consultant to join LiveRamp, which is an advertising technology business. I joined their New York City location, and LiveRamp at the time was kind of in its back half of being a growth stage company and preparing for IPO. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the advertising technology industry, there's a lot of behind the scenes middleware that power some of the very personalized advertising experiences we all either enjoy or don't enjoy on platforms like Instagram and Facebook and Google. And so large brands, advertisers, retailers who have access to our first party data as consumers. So if you think about going to a Banana Republic to buy, a Pima cotton shirt, and Banana Republic wants to market to you on the internet, they would have to take your data from the point of sale, basically the data associated with your credit card swipe, and reconcile it to your third party cookie. And so LiveRamp was responsible for identity resolving your first party data to the third party cookie so that Banana Republic and other large brands and advertisers could market to you on the internet. And so I really enjoyed kind of the subject matter that I was building in, not necessarily the industry. I thought that advertising technology had for a long time kind of overstepped its bounds in terms of maybe over personalizing or kind of encroaching the line of what I would consider to be creepy in a lot of cases. But learned a lot during my career at LiveRamp, not only in terms of reconciling large offline data sets to the third-party cookie and kind of the data linking exercises that come along with that, but also how to grow and scale product and engineering teams as an organization is maturing from maybe being an early stage startup to now entering into its growth stage and beyond, and some of the challenges that comes with that sort of growth at that sort of scale. In 2019, Akash and I, my younger brother and I, who at the time was finishing up his undergraduate studies, had joined a data science startup in New York City called Enigma. Him and I decided that we would take a leap of faith, something that him and I had always kind of dreamt of doing as kids, and become entrepreneurs together. And so without much of I would say, semblance of what we were going to build, him and I decided to leave our really comfortable jobs to pursue kind of this, and I'm sure you guys have seen Silicon Valley, the HBO show, kind of pursue our own version of that as siblings and founders. I ultimately joined Naya as the founding employee or the first employee in the VP of product, where I spent the subsequent 2.5, 3 years taking that company from pre-product, pre-seed, pre-revenue to Series C, which we raised in early 2022. And then, as Nikita mentioned, there was a confluence of both personal events. Akash had gotten into this basketball injury, and some experiences that we had during our time building Naya that really shed light on this massive problem that we thought really needed to be solved, and that was around revenue cycle for healthcare. So if you think about all of the healthcare organizations in this country, all the providers that are distributing these really great care experiences for us, they're also charged with the responsibility of having to get reimbursed by the insurance that the patients have. And so unlike most countries in the United States, there's obviously a third-party payer. And so when we go into a doctor's office, we submit our insurance card, and then kind of there's this magical process that takes place behind the scenes. And all of a sudden, we as patients get this patient responsibility or this bill in the mail, maybe 2-3 months later. But the process that takes place behind the scenes is one that we learned pretty intimately costs healthcare organizations quite a pretty penny, sometimes to the tune of 10 to 15% of their top line revenue. And in conjunction with not only the cost of collecting this payment from the insurance companies, we also realized that most of the third-party vendors that were responsible for doing this on behalf of these healthcare organizations were not doing a really great job. And so net collection rates, if you're a healthcare organization, we realized was often sometimes between 80 and 85%, if not lower. And so if you combine the 10 to 15% that you're paying these vendors with the kind of net collection rate that leaves a lot to be desired, we realized that there's a $25-30 billion problem here to be solved. And so that's when we got really inspired, despite raising our third round of capital in our first business and growing our team here in New York City to over 150 people. We got really inspired about taking another leap of faith and getting back into the trenches of company building in the middle of 2022. And so, yeah, we've been focused on taking our business from 0 to 1, and I'm happy to share more about that, but I'll probably pause there and kick it back to Nikita.
Absolutely. First off, extremely impressive background, and maybe first off a question or a few questions on your background, and then we can definitely dive in with some more on what's been going on with Adonis. But I guess first off, like when you and Akash kind of made the decision to like dive in and build something, how did you kind of like land in the healthcare segment, and especially kind of given your experience in like a variety of other end sectors, like was there like a huge learning curve, and I guess positioning yourself like amongst others who might bring years of experience in the field, and it is one of those industries where people do kind of like look for that level of background. Like how did you kind of, I guess, overcome that barrier?
Yeah, so healthcare was always an area that was super interesting to me. I grew up in a family that had a lot of kind of physicians in our extended family, and I also had a desire in my earliest days as an undergraduate to study medicine, and so it was always something that was exciting to me. I realized I didn't have this classic aptitude to really pursue a career in medicine, and quickly decided to. I was in the same boat also. Yeah, quickly decided to pivot away from care delivery, but it was always something that I was excited about, and I think I had this light bulb moment while I was a consultant in 2013 or 2014 when the federal government was launching the Affordable Care Act exchange on the internet. So the firm that I was working for at the time was tasked with the responsibility of basically launching the Affordable Care Act open exchange. And I realized just how challenging of a project that was, having to essentially link data across hundreds or if not thousands of different insurance companies, the respective rates, the plan designs for these insurance companies, and then building kind of the framework for enabling folks to actually enroll in those plans. So that was a big light bulb moment for me to just expose kind of the vast complexity of the healthcare machine in the country, in the United States. And then I also spent time working with the Department of Veterans Affairs as a consultant. This was probably before a lot of your guys' time, but when the Department of Veterans Affairs had unfortunately been responsible for the untimely death of a few veterans associated with the lack of interoperability between different VA systems. And so that had kind of hit me kind of close to home. And so, always had an excitement around healthcare. And I guess fast forwarding a few years into the future, when Akash and I were thinking about different opportunities that we'd like to pursue, he at the time was working at a data science startup, as I mentioned. That data science startup was focused on helping large insurance companies get access to better underwriting data. So if you think about a United Healthcare or a Cigna or a Humana, when they go and pitch business to a large employer, they're essentially making an underwriting decision when they present that employer with different plan designs and different rates associated with those plans. And a lot of what we had learned, or Akash had learned at the time, was that these insurance companies are using kind of age-old methodologies around how to underwrite these plans. And so the company that he'd been working for was ushering in kind of this new school of thought as it relates to underwriting, specifically around looking at different employer populations within a large employer, understanding what their financial situation might look like, what their social determinants of health may look like, what their relative kind of education or socioeconomic status might look like, and using people analytics to underwrite. And so he had this exposure to kind of the insurance underbelly and the underwriting underbelly in the country, and was working with several large insurers in his previous role. And I, at the time, was working at this advertising technology business, learning how to link large data sets to one another. And so when we got together and we're like, okay, what do we want to actually double click on or triple click on or learn more about? I think the combination of his experience working in data science with these insurance companies and my experience working, in this advertising technology business, linking data sets together, lent itself quite well to what we ultimately went on to build at Naya. The one thing I'll say is that I think for Akash and I, we've never been afraid or challenged with entering into new industries, and we oftentimes will hire, our first handful of employees, not from the industry that we're currently focused on, but from other industries, because we think that it takes people to kind of second guess the existing paradigms or think outside of the box. And sometimes when you hire within certain industries, you bring with those hires the same age-old thinking to these historic problems. And so we oftentimes like to almost intentionally hire from different industries or adjacent industries, at least.
That makes sense. Awesome. And then maybe one area to start off with, I guess, drawing upon your experience from both Naya and likely currently at Adonis. A big kind of question amongst both the fellows building in healthcare and also kind of, I think, across cohort broadly is how to kind of sell to larger customers, whether it's in the enterprise space, whether you're selling to larger hospital care systems. I know you guys also are working with some large name channel partners as well too. And so would be curious, I guess, first up, if you have any high level tips for success or maybe I guess just broadly repeatable playbooks for larger enterprise sales, and then can definitely kind of dig deeper too.
Yeah, I can kind of start with the broad strokes and then maybe double click as it's relevant. I think first and foremost, if you're a young budding company and you have an exciting solution to a big problem, the biggest challenge you face initially is getting in front of the right person. And this is where I think developing demand or developing conversations with the right stakeholder becomes super, super important. And so what I can share in terms of how we've gone about doing that has been fairly straightforward and has worked pretty well for us, both in this business, but also our prior business. And that's leveraging our first and second degree networks. You guys, obviously, as fellows of SoMa Capital, have access to one another, but you also have access to all of SoMa Capital's portfolio companies, all of the advisors that lend their time to SoMa Capital, all the partners at SoMa Capital. And so leveraging that first degree network, at least initially when we were building our first business, and even now in building Adonis, had been tremendously instrumental in helping us get access to the right people. And from there, I think, especially when you're still kind of doing product discovery, it's really important to treat these first sets of conversations as discovery calls and treat the folks that you're speaking to as advisors initially, or even solicit their opinion on what you're building versus approaching them as buyers of your technology. I think when you can get in front of the right stakeholder and you can introduce them to a problem that, or a solution to a problem that they've been facing, but instead of saying, hey, I have something that I want to sell to you, you phrase it a little bit differently, which is, hey, I want something that I want your feedback on, and give them kind of a vested interest in what you're building and make them feel heard. You end up getting to the same end result, which is maybe a proof of concept or maybe kind of initial pilot or whatever it may be, but you do it in a more, I would say, genuine and more of a, you build more camaraderie around what it is that you're building, and folks tend to be very open to that. So I would say that's number one.
Yeah, and to that point, I guess first off, on kind of the point around pilots and engagements, speaking specifically within your experience, I guess working with employers, working with companies like ADP and the larger, or even kind of selling to providers like end providers, how do you kind of, I guess, think about structuring those engagements? I know a number of teams are kind of juggling between the decision to price those, to keep them as free trials, and then eventually it kind of lead to the conversion of those into long scale pilots, and making sure they're giving the right level of tender love and care, let's call it, throughout the pilots, to make sure the customers are heard as they are early design partners.
Yeah. So never in my career as an entrepreneur, even prior to that, have I ever issued like a unpaid pilot. I have kind of like a personal allergic reaction to that, only because it's signaling to the buyer that the value of what you're delivering is perhaps not perceived to be as high by you, the company. And so I think number one, if you have conviction around the return on investment or the business case with that potential buyer, then you should always price it, even if it's favorable pricing or let's say moving forward, most favored nations pricing with these early design partners. I think it's important to have some sort of pricing framework in place, even if it's a pilot where someone's taking a risk on you. It's always important to have it's always important for them to signal that they have some skin in the game, because let's fast forward 6 months into this pilot, you've delivered great results, and now you're getting into having a commercial discussion with this initial stakeholder who's enjoying this free pilot. You're now introducing the concept of them having to spend money to get the same value that they were getting before, and then they get into this calculus of deciding, oh, is it really worth it? Can I live without it, et cetera? And so I would say, for me personally, I've always liked to price pilots and be pretty rigorous around that. Which I think
because seeing so many things, it's like if you have some skin in the game, and it's a little bit hard to like rip and place once they've already maybe become fans of it, hopefully throughout the course of the pilot. And so hopefully kind of works out in the dynamic that they're like willing to upsize versus churn at that point.
For sure. And again, if you're engaging in a pilot with a large organization and you're perhaps not charging them as much as you would think a full-blown customer of yours would be willing to pay, well, you are also taking on a tremendous amount of risk. And so you want to make sure that when you do in fact engage in these pilot relationships, that you have conviction around being able to deliver on whatever it is the business case is. And I think the second part of your question, Nikita, was around how do you go from converting, let's say, a pilot customer into a full-blown customer that has multi-year terms on their contract. I think, again, it comes down to the business case that you've developed. And so one of the things we do at Adonis, and this has been interesting for us, is we go into a large healthcare organization. We meet with the CFOs and COOs of these organizations, and we say, hey, we know that revenue cycle is really, really challenging. And we also know that you're leaving a lot of money on the table. Perhaps you don't know the exact dollar amount that you're leaving on the table, but we know that you're leaving a considerable amount of money on the table just based on the size and scale of your organization. Let us come in and quantify that loss, or let us quantify how much money you are in fact leaving on the table. And once we've quantified that by stitching together the various systems of record internally, granted we're making a little bit of an investment in doing that analysis. Once we've quantified it, we then have a very hard business case to make, where we're saying, okay, you can, let's say, improve your EBITDA by 15% in working with Adonis. That 15% equates to $3 million in year one and $5 million in year two. Therefore, we think a 5x return on investment is totally amenable to both parties. And we build a case around kind of the empirical evidence that we've built conviction around.
And
the other thing I'll say around, just last thing about the pilots, one of the things that takes place when you're kind of issuing an invoice to a large enterprise is they actually put you through the procurement process, whether it's a $1 contract or a $1 million contract. The fact that you're invoicing them means that their procurement team needs to kind of usher you through the procurement process, which is oftentimes a good kind of long pole in the tent to get out of the way post pilot. So you'd hate to go through this really successful pilot where you didn't charge a customer, and then now that you're getting into commercial terms, the customer's like, hey, we actually need to bring you into this procurement process and have legal review you, et cetera. And so getting all of those T's crossed and I's dotted, I think, is really important as you're building that relationship.
Absolutely, that's super helpful. And then maybe one other thing around kind of the sales cycle here. So I know you guys are selling to like end providers, have like worked to explore the strategy of like working with PE groups that like might own certain types of like provider clinics, kind of going direct to provider, and then also working with like channel partners. And so would be curious if you found kind of, I guess speaking to healthcare specifically, like one specific approach to be more effective, and how you kind of think about like maybe diversifying revenue streams or your efforts like across different channels. And I think this is probably relevant to like some of the teams in other sectors as well too, where they do kind of explore the dynamics of like just different strategies to like reach end customers and
so I guess to rephrase the question a little bit, Adonis currently sells into 3 different segments. We work with physician groups that are single specialty. They're oftentimes led by physician entrepreneurs that wanted to open up their own practice, and in opening their own practice have experienced a considerable amount of growth. So maybe they have multiple locations, they perform a single specialty across all those locations, but they're largely owned and held by, a single physician or a partnership of physicians. So that's like segment number 1. Segment number 2 is, and you guys are probably familiar with this, there's been a lot of private equity roll-up activity within healthcare over the last 15 years, and that's accelerated during the pandemic and even post-pandemic. We view PE sponsors of large healthcare organizations to be direct customers of ours as well, because a PE firm will come in and acquire these, I would say, cash-rich but operations-poor healthcare organizations in the hopes that they can turn them around, make them more efficient, and ultimately flip them maybe to another PE shop. So that's segment number 2. And then segment number 3 is where we work closely with large hospital systems and the revenue cycle partners of those large hospital systems. And so this may be unique to us, but across all those 3 segments, we found that the buying motivation and the buying intent tends to be largely the same, which is these healthcare organizations, number 1, want to reduce the overhead expense associated with collecting revenue. And number 2, they want to do a better job of collecting revenue. And so we haven't found a ton of nuanced kind of buying reasons, although we think that certain subsets of these buyers are maybe more interested in let's say, maximizing earnings before taxes, debt, and appreciation, EBITDA, or really interested in reducing the cost to collect so that they can focus their efforts away from kind of the administrative burden of healthcare onto like the actual care delivery side of healthcare, which is in fact why they went into business in the first place. So ultimately, they're buying our software for the same reason. Their intensity around saving money versus saving money to reallocate resources is sometimes a little bit nuanced, but haven't seen a ton of kind of disparity there. But what I will say is, in our previous business, however, we were selling to large insurance payers. We're selling to large employers. We're also working with benefits brokers like Aon and Acrisure, and a lot of these like big household benefits brokerages. And what we found to be true in that business is that each of the different channel partners actually had a different motivation behind wanting to work with us, which is what introduced a considerable amount of complexity around how we price, how we pitch, how we build business cases, and ultimately how we scale within those channels. And so I think if you guys are building kind of a multi-segment go-to-market motion, it's important to understand what the buying intent obviously is of each of the different stakeholders, but also, are you cannibalizing other segments of your business by focusing on this one top segment versus others? So definitely something to think strategically about. I think in the earliest days, you just want to get some wins on the board, and over-engineering kind of your go-to-market can sometimes be more harm than good. But definitely as you continue to mature and have more wins under your belt, can add more kind of sophistication to that strategy.
Absolutely. And I think kind of like speaking to the RCM space, and again, like this dynamic might exist in several other spaces as well too, but it's definitely something that like many people have been trying to tackle. People have taken like a number of different approaches, where they're building like point solutions at one step of the entire process, or like trying to do even end-to-end solutions that have like varying levels of automation or so claimed automation. And so curious, I guess, like you guys have done a really effective and impressive job in a short amount of time in penetrating the space. And so what's kind of like your unlock, whether it's like on the sales side or I guess like on the back end in your data vault, and how are you kind of competing against others, whether it's like on price, I guess like on your industry relationships or your ability to sell to them?
Yeah, I think our competitive advantage is probably multifold. I think number one, building a product that was truly more effective at collecting revenue on behalf of healthcare providers was the most important thing for us and even the inception of the business. So we sat back before even incorporating the business or even thinking about starting a new company and thought about what the major pitfalls of revenue cycle are today. And we realized that the incumbents in the space have traditionally, number one, either thrown a lot of humans at the revenue cycle challenge because there is so much manual, or historically had been so much manual intervention involved with submitting claims to payers. And so they would solve kind of scale challenges by scaling up the footprint of humans that they had working for them, which of course introduced a lot of typographical, clerical, and kind of issues that come with high volumes of manual work. So that was number one. Number two, we realized that companies that maybe did have more of a technology forward approach to solving revenue cycle challenges had initially kind of wedged into the market by solving one job to be done within revenue cycle and realized that, okay, I've automated the way patient visits are coded into ICD-10 and CPT codes. I've automated that, but I have no way of scrubbing claims now. I have no way of actually ensuring that when I do assemble a claim, a payer has a high propensity to pay that claim out, because I never built that muscle because I was just focused on automating the coding of claims. And so what these organizations had realized is that the best way for them to diversify the capabilities that they could go to market with is by acquiring net new companies. And so they would acquire these companies to subsume these different jobs to be done. But in acquiring them, they never really centralized the technical infrastructure behind these different capabilities. And so we found that despite the fact that these companies were more tech forward, they were in fact introducing a lot of frail and broken integrations. They weren't speaking to one another over the course of acquiring these many different capabilities. And so I guess all of that preamble is to say that our initial vision or our initial approach was that we wanted to be a very broad platform and that we could come in and pitch a customer on being their end-to-end revenue cycle partner in a way that traditionally they may have outsourced to a human-based team. So we wanted to have the breadth to be able to do that, but we also wanted to be modular enough to be able to deploy single jobs to be done within a given organization without disrupting kind of their existing workflow if we knew that selling them the entire end-to-end billing service wasn't kind of either initially possible or wasn't advantageous to that business. So it's kind of this breadth with modularity that I think you'll see with a lot of businesses that call themselves compound startups. So if you think about Rippling, for instance, which is a massively successful company that I believe SoMa actually invested in as well, founded by Parker Conrad. He talks about this idea of the compound startup, which is traditional thinking within technology businesses has been find one problem that you can solve and do a really, really good job at it, and customers will come and success will come and growth will come. But Parker Conrad, in building Rippling, kind of defied that and said, actually introducing these little point solutions to solve every single challenge within running a business actually introduces a lot of complexity and introduces a lot of opportunity for leakage and breakage, et cetera. And so he actually built one company that actually contains like 15 or 20 different products, which is kind of like our approach as well. Is like we want to be able to do all these different jobs, but also be able to maybe just do one of the jobs when only one of the jobs is needed. Does that make sense? So that was kind of our competitive vision or our philosophy. It's like breadth but modularity. That's number one. I think that's one of our kind of unlocks because it allows us to go into any healthcare organization and meet them where they are. We've also seen a lot of revenue cycle new entrants. A lot of companies have seen revenue cycle as an opportunity to build a lot of innovation. And what we've learned in kind of studying the trajectories of these companies, as well as just kind of learning about them over the course of time, is that working with them as a customer isn't always super easy because a healthcare organization doesn't always have access to technical resources to read and write to a set of APIs. Dr. Wang, who runs a 3-location dermatology practice in Southern California, doesn't have access to a data engineer that can work with a technology for a startup. And so we wanted to be super easy for our customers to work with. So I would say that vision from the onset was also one of our kind of competitive unlocks. And hopefully I'm not going into too much detail, and this is all kind of relevant to you guys.
Perfect level of detail and super helpful. I maybe want to step back before I open it up to the team with just a few more, I guess, broader questions on your experience as a founder. And so I guess first off, like you're a second time founder, are there any like big lessons or takeaways you have from NIO, whether it was like from the experience of the early founding days, whether it was from the experience of structuring your team, as an experience of guiding like a sales motion that you kind of like see as top of mind or helpful to voice here?
Yeah, I think there's kind of this adage that I've heard being kicked around every now and then, which is first time founders think about product and second time founders think about distribution. That certainly applies to the way we thought about building Adonis. We knew that building an innovative product was obviously very important and would be the only way that anyone would want to work with us. But the second order problem is, okay, once you've built this really great thing, how do you get people to actually adopt it? And what sorts of distribution strategies are you going to implement? And so I would say as a business, we've focused maybe even over-indexed on developing a top of funnel demand generation engine. Because I think what you guys will find in building your own businesses is that as founders of these businesses, you will have a lot of success in the founder-led sales motion. You can get in front of stakeholders and speak forwards and backwards about the problem that you're solving and also why you're best positioned to solve it. And you will close deals and you will get a lot of early traction. But over time, in order to go from, let's say, 1 to 10 instead of 0 to 1, you need to have a demand generation engine that is bringing in high quality marketing qualified leads into your funnel. And then you also need a sales force that can take that demand and run it through a sales playbook that's repeatable and is sustainable as well. And so I think one of the pieces of wisdom that we've come into this business with versus our previous business is that we can't simply rely on the founder-led sales motion to take us to, the moon. We need to really invest in kind of the number one, demand generation. So over-invest in marketing and figuring out what works and what doesn't early on. And then also work on true sales enablement and building a sales playbook. And so where I think in the previous business, I would get my biggest like rush closing large kind of enterprise deals, like multi-year deals. And I would get so energized by being able to do that time and time again. Now I get much more excited when the earliest sales hires on our team are able to do that instead. And I can just kind of sit back and kind of guide them through the process. So I think as you're going from, early stage pre-seed to commercialization, thinking in terms of how you can repeat some of the different milestones in your go-to-market is going to behoove kind of your growth as you continue.
Absolutely. It's more of an approach of like building a foundation versus I guess like climbing up the mountain. But awesome.
It's a lot of fun though. Like the founder-led sales is a lot of fun, and I hope
eventually you have to hand over the keys to that castle. So awesome. And then one more fun question on my end before I open up the team is I know you're co-founding a business with your brother. Do you guys often butt heads? Like how do you kind of navigate handling that within familiar relationships? And the only experience I have to draw on is I was doubles partners with my sister in high school, and we used to fight on the court, off the court, everywhere. And so I'd be curious to hear your experiences.
Yeah, it's been an interesting life experience for sure to start kind of our second company together. I would say that when you choose someone to found a company with, you're making among kind of the most consequential decisions that you can. You're picking, not your life partner, but your business partner. And that is highly, highly consequential as you continue to grow your businesses. The person that is in the trenches with you, fielding, the toughest problems alongside you is super important. And so I think the best founder relationships are kind of built on this bedrock of deep underlying trust. And with Akash and I, because we grew up together, we understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. We understand each other's motivations. I think there's never a time, at least so far, where we've had to question each other's intentions or trust in one another. And we've just built this intuition with working with one another that I think is invaluable. I think the analogy I like to use is, you can build like an all-star NBA team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win the NBA championship. I think it's the chemistry within that kind of 5-person stack that really dictates how far you'll go. And so working to develop that scar tissue with your co-founders and your early team, both on and off the field, in work and outside of work, is super important. But yeah, I mean, that being said, we definitely get into our fair share of disputes and arguments. Because I am the more handsome brother, I tend to concede to a lot of his arguments and let him have it. But no, I'm just kidding. No, I think ultimately we tend to favor whatever we think is best for the business. And that's another thing is when you have a founder that is indexing only on what's best for the business and not necessarily what's best for him or herself, it allows you to engage in healthy debate. Similar to how, like, if you're in Congress, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you want to believe that the person on the other side of the aisle is looking for what's best for like the American constituency. And with Akash and I, we're always just looking for what's best for the company. And we have a lot of conviction in one another. But it's not always like fairy tales and rainbows, obviously.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to open up to the team. If anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute and directly ask them.
Hey, Aman, thanks for the time. I'm really curious, how did you catalyze traditional healthcare buyers who seemingly have significant approval and compliance requirements to adopt a new tech solution? How did you navigate the risks that they probably encountered as a new startup in actually selling and implementing with them?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things that we've been pleasantly surprised with is primarily in our core target market, which is these physician groups, as I mentioned. We're working with, let's say, again, a physician entrepreneur that maybe runs 2 or 3 different practices. We find that historically they're used to outsourcing revenue cycle. And so when we come in and pitch them, it's not necessarily a novel way of working for them. It's essentially what they've been used to doing for years. And so we're not introducing like a new paradigm in working with them. What we do find is that there is kind of a healthy degree of back and forth when it comes to data security and ensuring that their precious data is in safe hands. I think we've been able to kind of get ahead of that by getting the requisite security attestations and just having our internal kind of security protocols squared away and locked tight. That being said, we have worked with very large hospital systems. So we have Baptist Health of South Florida, which is the largest hospital system in Miami-Dade County, as a customer of ours. And you will ostensibly, over the course of selling into enterprises, go through like 60, 70, 80 question long security questionnaires. And that sometimes that's just not avoidable. But having your security posture, I think, firmed up and buttoned up is super important. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And when you were just starting, how did you get those initial providers to work with you as a startup for this solution?
Yeah, getting your first few customers is sometimes the most challenging, but also the most rewarding. For us, as I mentioned, we don't treat kind of initial calls with our prospective customers as like pitches. Instead, we treat them as opportunities to create value for those prospects. So one of the things, actually, let me ask you a question. What are you building right now?
We're actually building procurement tech for providers, anywhere from single location all the way up to ambulatory surgical. So we're working with a few ASCs, a few critical access regional hospitals, as well as smaller provider groups.
Okay, so analogous to what we do, perhaps for your business, would be to go to the procurement person for your software, which is kind of a funny thing to think about because it is procurement software, and say, hey, you guys have been procuring medical durable goods and medical technology and hardware the complete wrong way for the last 5 years. There's a better way to do it. But instead of me pitching you on this like hypothetical return on investment, how about you give me access to your QuickBooks and you give me access to your historical contracts, and I will do a look back analysis of what you could have saved had you worked with a more forward-thinking procurement software. So instead of saying, hey, we can solve the world's challenges for you, you instead say, hey, let me create some awareness around this problem that you may or may not have known that you had, and actually quantify what that problem looks like for you. And so when you do that, customers are typically like, okay, well, Kevin's not charging me anything for this. He's doing it for free. What's there to lose? And so you come in, you kind of aggregate all this data, you do all this analysis, and you present back to them, maybe over the course of 1 or 2 weeks, a report that says, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Procurement professional, you actually missed out on, $5 million of savings had you bought these medical durable goods from this vendor versus that other one. And so you're actually quantifying the value. And so I would say that has been extremely helpful for us in unlocking our first tranche of customers, is coming in and actually quantifying what we know they could have saved, or what we knew they could have gained had they worked with a more forward-thinking partner. And so I would encourage to maybe try that out and see if that doesn't help kind of excel. And to be clear, despite the fact that you're making this investment, and it's kind of a heavy investment relative to perhaps other go-to-market strategies, you're making this heavier initial investment in this customer, but you're also gathering a lot of data that you can then use to hydrate your product, or you can use to learn from, et cetera. So it's not a zero-sum game by any means. There's tremendous internal value, even if the deal doesn't actually get closed.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Certainly.
Anyone else have a question?
Hi, Aman. So big question. You kind of covered it a little bit, but as far as transitioning from being, having founder-driven sales to a true repeatable sales process, could you walk us through a step-by-step of how you transitioned, and maybe some of the big epiphanies that you had, or mistakes that you made throughout the process?
Yeah, certainly. To give you kind of like a high level overview of the different stages in our sales pipeline, we have kind of these various outbound and inbound demand generation strategies that we're running at any given time. That could include content, it could include in-person events, it can include an SDR motion, an SDR team that we're building. So folks basically emailing and calling potential buyers. So we have a variety of these different, let's call them machines, kind of running at any given time that is meant to generate high intent marketing qualified leads. Once those leads get qualified by the marketing team, they then enter into our sales funnel. And so the first kind of point of interaction with that highly qualified lead is a discovery call. And what I think I had realized prior to thinking about sales in terms of repeatable steps and repeatable process, what I had realized is that I was kind of shooting off the side of my hip when having these initial calls, and I was in a lot of ways winging it. I was taking the feedback that I was getting live, responding to it in a way that I thought would be favorable to the advancement of the discussion, and not really taking the time to standardize the series of questions I was asking initially to get to know that particular organization or that particular stakeholder. And so I'd say number one is standardizing your discovery process based on the type of customer that you're speaking to. So having your marketing team do some attribution work to tell you like the different relevant things about the customer, so that when you do go into discovery, you have kind of repeatable discovery framework that you can then use later on in the sales process. So that's like step number one is discovery. Step number two is further qualifying them in or out. If we think that they're not a good potential buyer, then we'll either put them on an email sequence to kind of keep them warm over time, or we'll advance them down to the next discussion. And that next discussion is where we're actually formally introducing the different opportunities that we have to work with them. So that could include a product 101 or a product overview. It could include a demo of our software. It could include the potential stakeholder meeting with an expert on our team that's well versed in medical billing. And so during that discovery process, we have the ability to now route the customer to appropriate next step. And so after that kind of product 101 discussion, we're then further qualifying and advancing them through the pipeline. And what we found is that thinking about it in terms of processes and distinct and discrete steps, and taking the time to apply frameworks to each of these different steps has over time allowed us to accelerate our time to close deal versus decelerate it. And so there's a tremendous amount of value I think I didn't realize existed in kind of incorporating standardization, that now, having made that investment, we're enjoying some of the benefits of a shorter sales cycle, which obviously is something that we all want. So, but happy to, Harlem, spend time maybe one-off to talk about it more deeply, and maybe even connect you with folks on our team that have been responsible for developing that playbook.
Definitely, yeah, because my next question would be like, how did you choose the specific lead generation machines that you chose, and what was your thought process going into that? Because it's like, obviously, like you're saying, you don't want certain processes to cannibalize other aspects of your business. And when you're first starting, it's like, how do you choose what lead generation strategy is going to be more fruitful?
Yeah. So number one, I think having the right technology stack in place to support rapid experimentation is super important. And so an example of this could be, all right, well, I need to have a CMS linked to my website, because if I don't have a CMS, then I'm going to need to work with an engineer, front-end engineer, to upload a blog post every time I write a blog post. So like investing in the right infrastructure early on to support experimentation is super important. And number two, and this is something that we're going to consistently be on an ever-long journey to figuring out, is for each of these different machines that you're standing up, you want to make sure you have a good sense of how much you're spending and how many resources you're putting into each of these machines, and what they're actually generating. Because over time, and for us, I think by the end of the year, we want to have like a very firm story around, okay, we attended X number of conferences, we can attribute X number of leads to those conferences, and those X number of leads have resulted in X millions of dollars of revenue. And so the return on investment on a single event dollar is Y. And then we want to have the same kind of math equation worked out for each of the different kind of machines that we're running, so that by the end of the year, when we're ready to raise more capital, or ready to make a more pointed decision on how to invest in demand generation, we're using kind of this empirical evidence of this historic performance and saying, okay, we want to throw a bunch of money at content, we want to throw a bunch of money at event spend, because we know those are the two areas that have the highest ROI for us as a business. So, but the only way you can get there is if you have that infrastructure to support kind of experimentation at rapid scale.
Okay, and so you pretty much just started and you were like, okay, these are the machines that I think are going to work, boom, and then from there the data like proves whether you were right or not, and then you lean into whatever machine is really
Exactly.
okay. So what prompted you to choose those as opposed to other routes?
It was a combination of like competitive analysis, so looking at companies that we admire and think have done maybe a good job of selling into the same stakeholder, perhaps not the same solution, but selling into the same stakeholder. So, and what's good about demand generation or outbound, the outbound motion is it's all public, right? Like you can go into your competitor's website, do a reverse keyword search, and be like, okay, these guys are ranking in these keywords. They're publishing X number of pieces of content every week. And we know that as a business, they're doing pretty well because they just, let's say, raised a bunch of money, or they went public, or whatever it is. You can kind of reverse engineer what's worked for them. And that could be a good starting point for you as you're thinking about the different strategies as well. And so, yeah, sometimes you don't need to like reinvent the wheel, and you just need to figure out and get wisdom from like what's worked for other people, and try and fit that to your business, or your way of going to market.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be clear, like we're still figuring all this out. This is kind of how we think about it internally. I think the execution and actually having that ROI story to tell by the end of the year is something that we're heavily indexing on and super excited about.
Anyone else have any final questions?
Hey, Aman, just had a quick question. I really appreciate you kind of walking us through your story. So I guess kind of just thinking about RCM broadly, like it's a pretty big space, and I think like I don't have too much familiarity on like the exact workflows, but my understanding is that it kind of differs across, different specialties and geographies, different payers, et cetera. Like how have you guys how have you guys thought of tackling that? And like in the early days, are you guys focusing on specific specialties or yeah, kind of like what is your approach towards that?
Yeah, so the kind of central artifact for submitting a claim for reimbursement is this thing called the CMS 1500. The CMS 1500 is a form that nearly every payer has to accept, both in paper format, but also digital format through what's known as EDIs. And so we know that the end output, regardless of whether you're performing dermatology services or you're providing OB-GYN services or whatever it is going to be that CMS 1500. And so treating that CMS 1500 as our like core domain to build off of was kind of the initial focus. Is like, we know that this is going to be kind of the focal point of everything we do, is assembling these high integrity claim documents essentially. And from there, I think the second order question becomes, okay, well, you can assemble the documents just fine, depending on like agnostic of what the specialty is or who the customer is, because you know that's like a standardized form. But the question you're asking is, how do you ensure across different payer mixes or different mixes of specialties and payers and different contracts that there is kind of a high first pass acceptance rate of these claims, or a high kind of payout rate for these claims? And that's really where like the scrubbing of the claim comes into play. And so you need to be able to look at a claim and say, okay, well, we're submitting code 99285 to Humana. What are the different rules you want to scrub this claim against to ensure that it has a high likelihood of getting paid out? And that's really where studying the historic data of that particular practice bears a lot of fruit. Our, I think, founding belief is that the majority of healthcare organizations are generating sufficient enough data as it relates to RCM every single day to solve all of their RCM challenges. The challenge for them is really harnessing all the kind of fruit of that data. And so if I know that Humana is routinely denying code 99285 because Humana expects there to be a modifier on that claim, which is basically kind of a code that indicates the intensity of the visit. If I know that to be true for the last 50,000 claims that have been submitted to Humana, then why not implement a rule to scrub that claim to ensure that we're appending that modifier? So I guess long story short, the central kind of output of this entire process is the CMS 1500. What is nuanced across specialties and payers is the way we scrub these claims, and the way we develop the scrubbing logic is by actually studying the historic data of these practices and then applying similar learnings across different, across the same types of specialties within customers. So if we work with one dermatology practice, then odds are we can apply a lot of the same rules to the N+1 dermatology practice.
Gotcha. It makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
We won't take any more of your time, and just want to once again say thanks a lot for joining us and sharing your insights and your experience. And this was hugely constructive to, I know, for me, and I'm sure for the fellows as well too. So much appreciated, and yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. If you have any additional questions, you can shoot me an email or follow me on LinkedIn, and always down to chat. It was really great meeting you all, and hope you have an enjoyable time in the program.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.